People who work in rich people's homes, what is the most out of touch thing you've ever seen? About 20 years ago, I worked for a very wealthy property developer, one of the biggest in my country. A self-made man, a hard git with a decent heart. His kid at the time was about 16. I was doing millions of euro of work a year for the developer, but hadn't much direct dealings with him. He had a management team to run his business. So when he called me directly, it was unusual. He asked would I take his kid for a few weeks for work experience and asked me not to tell anyone else who the kid was. The kid wasn't applying himself in school and was getting soft. I agreed to pay the kid €80 per day. I picked the kid up each morning at 6:30 and dropped him at the gates of his 15,000 skiffed home each evening at 6 p.m. each day. He did a lot of heavy laboring, wrecked his hands with blisters, and was drifting to sleep on his way home in my van. On his last day, his old man was there when I dropped him off and sat into my van to chat. He told me he himself was the eldest of 9 kids and had dropped out of school at 14 to work to help support his family. It was very frustrating to him to see his kid beginning to take their life for granted, and he wanted to give him a taste of the real world. His $800 of earned money for 2 weeks of grafting equated to his gaming setup in his room. The kid wasn't applying lovely, nice manners and didn't seem to have any ego. Did whatever was asked of him without complaint. I think the dad was just nipping any laziness in the bud. The kid is now running the family business with the old man in semi-retirement, and he is doing a great job of it. He treats everyone with respect, and you'd often see him chatting away to guys on site about sports teams, etc. Story 2. I was a real estate appraiser at one time. I appraised a mansion once, and the lady just let her little dogs crap all over the house. She wasn't the only rich person like that either. I was just always shocked when people had these $3 million homes and they lived in absolute filth. My mom always told us growing up that there wasn't anything wrong with being poor, but soap was cheap, so we better not be dirty. Story 3. It happened like 8 times in a month. I'd go into a wealthy person's house, they'd have Fox News on. Fox News would be talking about how the tariffs were making things cheaper, and at least half the time, they would, unprompted, try to engage me in conversation about how the liberals were deceiving the masses into thinking that things were more expensive because whatever luxury they spend their money on actually got cheaper while I'm over here living in my car and eating out of the dumpster because I had simply been priced out of food and housing, even though I had a goddamn full-time job. Story 4. I did flooring installation as a third-party contractor through Home Depot, so we got a ridiculous amount of millionaire homes. The most out-of-touch thing I ever heard one client say was that their $5.2 million home they just bought was just a fixer-upper project home for them to have fun with. I asked if they were going to resell it. They said, "Oh no, it's just something for us to do for the hell of it. It'll just another one of our homes." This house was in impeccable condition. No fixer-upper to it. The snacks we were offered by some of the millionaire clients too were like, what? Like they had multiple brands of energy drinks or some crazy fruit drink I've never heard of in glass bottles. And they had like cheeses I'd never heard of and like every kind of animal beef, giddy, like very expensive meats. They wouldn't just give us one. They'd give us like piles of this crap, like it wasn't crap. Those clients were also the ones who tipped generously. Most clients didn't tip. A lot of the rich ones were rude and didn't talk to us. Damn sure didn't tip, but some of them would. And those tips would be like $400, $500 each. Story 5. I worked for a wealthy client in the United Kingdom many years back, renovating their townhouse. On our lunch break, she would urge us to use the pool on her property during the summer, and we expressed that the brick dust would ruin the pool, so she bought an automated pool cleaner system and had it installed. About a month after that, she tried to get all the workers on site to go golfing with her and was flabbergasted we couldn't just leave work for the afternoon to play golf. She was extremely kind and generous and would get ice cream delivered to us every day when the temp was too high. I gained a lot of respect for her when the first fit of electrics went in, and I realized she was having Ethernet installed in every room. She was about 70 years old. Story 6. I'm an assistant in a 10 million house. This woman gets at least 10 Amazon packages every single day. I return 60% of them. I've returned thousands of them, adding I've built and decorated 2 Xmas trees so she can decide which she wants, one taken down and put in storage. Both were brand new. It's always brand new. Why even use storage? Story 7. I knew someone who had a replica of the War Memorial Opera House, and it was built in the 1920s, so had a prohibition tunnel underground that went out to a lion cage. No lion. Story 8. Dude had a motorcycle collection in his basement. Another wealthy customer straight up told me and my crew that poor people should be lost. Story 9. Watching a millionaire complain about how exhausting life is while their housekeeper quietly followed behind them, turning off the lights they kept leaving on in a mansion bigger than my entire neighborhood. Story 10. On a positive note. My brother was doing hardware floors in a house. The homeowner's deceased husband had owned the local NHL team. He had sold the team before he passed, but one condition of the sale was that him and his wife got a prime box seat for life. I mean prime, They kept on trying to buy her out so they could expand the box next door that held the TV cameras. She enjoyed the games and the box, but never filled it with anyone personal. What she did do was sell tickets to it for anyone she knew who wanted it for 20. She didn't care about the money and gave anything anyone paid to local charity. Story 11. Carpet in the garage. Andy Warhol, hanging in the living room. She didn't tip. Compulsive shopper with so many clothes, with tags still attached. You couldn't walk into the closet. They literally spilled out into the next room. Story 12. In a previous life, I worked at a computer store, selling and fixing computers, as well as doing on-site installations of computers and accessories. A strange regular of ours came in because she wanted a computer in her kitchen to organize her recipes. It had to be on the home's wired network because the printer was in another room. This was before Wi-Fi was common, and it absolutely had to be one of our high-end machines because she doesn't want it to be slow for her recipe collection. Anyway, we primarily sold Apple stuff, so I talked her down to a PowerMac 7166 AV. She had zero need for the S-video capture and output features of the AV model, which added $800 to the price, but she insisted she wanted the best. The only reason she didn't get the 8100 AV model, which was, if I recall, about $2,000 more, was because it was a tower and would be too unsightly for her kitchen. So just the base machine was $3450 in 1994, or about $75.50 in today's dollars. Add on the monitor, the CD drive, the Ethernet adapter, my labor, and the 32 MB of memory she insisted she needed, her recipe machine was well over $5,000 in 1994 dollars, or about $11K today. Also, she wouldn't have to use the computer 15 feet away in the next room to print out a recipe. What was really weird was how obsessed she was that it blended into her kitchen aesthetic, to the point that as I was working on the machine, every time I left the room to get something out of my car or pull a cable through the wall, she'd put the cover back on the machine and start putting stuff all over it. Plants, books, decorations, you name it. After about the third time of asking her to please wait until I'm done and having to take all of it back off to get back inside the machine, I threw in the towel and said I couldn't finish tonight. I told her I'm way past the allotted time for this job and I'd be in trouble if I didn't get back to the shop soon. It wasn't true, I just wanted to go home and eat dinner, but it was the only thing that got her attention. She said she couldn't help herself, apologized, and agreed to pay cash for another hour of my time to get it done tonight. Sold. Definitely the weirdest interaction I ever had at that job. Story 13. Wealth manager in a multi-fo Galleria when I was at university, ex-escort, and model. So I spend a lot of time with ultra-wealthy people in various different regards. 2 PPL falling out in an argument over who their favorite yacht designer was. A guy bought a company that made a certain product in order to cancel that product to spite his ex-wife, who loved it individually curated newspapers covering only the topics you're interested in, written overnight and updated immediately before they're printed and given to you. Messaging a friend about a bit of fashion news that was about to break just before I got in the shower. And by the time I got down to breakfast and was given my paper, it included that story that had only broken less than half an hour earlier. Obsessive illusion of normalcy, pretending they are just normal people who happen to be billionaires, one family where you never see or hear a single member of staff, 3 full-time live-in staff, and maybe a dozen dailies. No member of staff is allowed in a room adjoining a room where any family member is, because he wants to pretend he's a regular person and regular people don't have household staff related to that. 3 elevators, a nice big normal one for the family, and 2 small well-hidden ones for staff, mini episodes of his favorite TV shows filmed in his house by the actual cast and crew. And because some people's interest may have been piqued by something particular I wrote in the first line, if an ultra-wealthy guy likes X, then he also likes X plus a naked model. Custom adult shoots in your home, one guy collects sports cars, and whenever he gets a new one, it is shipped somewhere picturesque, northern Italy, usually for the last few, and films me driving it naked another guy who got most of his ex-wife's high jewelry when they divorced. And we shot a glossy brochure of me modeling the jewelry naked in the house that she was going to get as part of the settlement. He also had a dinner party a few weeks later where all the waitresses were naked apart from heels and the jewelry, you know, the smart mirrors that you can play video on. A shower with a full-size one as one of the walls of the shower. I recorded 20+ hours of me showering over the space of a month or so. He can watch me in the shower whenever he wants. It looks like I'm showering right next to you. He had that done in his main bathroom plus each of the guest bathrooms. I also really liked it, so had it done in my last apartment and will have it in the new house. Story 14. I don't work in a rich person's home, but I was in an airport lounge once and overheard a conversation between 2 guys. One was bemoaning the fact that he had to replace all his shirts with custom tailored shirts as his existing shirts didn't fit over his new Panerai watch. Story 15. Not really in a home, but in a hangar. Worked for a maintenance department that serviced 14-plus aircraft, some fun pistons, a few jets, a few amphibs. They would regularly take the jet into the big city for a shopping haul. They were easily spending millions on aircraft just sitting there. I agree with the other folks about the snacks. The amount of money being spent left and right was insane. Houses, cars, more planes. It was crazy to see a lifestyle like that. Story 16. I nannied for two very successful and affluent families. One had a good deal of notoriety in my city-state and had name recognition on a national level. Think politics. I'm going to be totally honest when I say I never came across any diva or out-of-touch behavior. They paid well and treated me with respect. They never asked me to do anything that they seemed above doing themselves. That said, there are things I could critique these families for, such as the fathers being virtually absent as parents, but they never treated me badly or below them. Story 17. I covered London and the southeast of England, doing at least 5 homes a day for several years working on utilities. Because everyone was our customer, my patch literally covered royal palaces and actual substances den squats. The job was to change their gas and electricity meters, show them the in-home display, and give every saving advice. As such, the money-saving advice applied equally whether you're hanging out for spare change or have an 11-room mansion to heat. But there is a point at which you're too rich to care, and you're not meeting those people, you're meeting their people. A handful of all demographics tried to tip. We don't really do tipping here, so all politely declined unless they were really insistent. I would guess about 4 or 5 people a year offering a tip. More people on a Friday afternoon would offer a beer to take home. What is expected, though, not demanded, is the offer of a cup of tea. If they want extra work done outside of your remit, it's remembered if they offer a cuppa. Some houses you wouldn't want to accept anyway. Wipe your feet on the way out. Regarding rich out-of-touch things, I can honestly say I had no negative experiences that I could weigh against rich people. I've been attacked with a kettle of hot water and other violence threatened, of course, but that was people I was cutting off. I did visit one particular household name, International. I'd be surprised if you didn't know of her. All flavors of celebrity are not unusual on this patch. She was very nice and did me a cooked breakfast and we ate together. She was so out of touch with reality, always being surrounded by hangers-on, not being able to have normal conversations, lacking trust and always worrying about unguarded comments appearing in the press. So I gave her the gift of an hour of normality. Story 18, toilet that was the one staff and us trades could use, was entirely wallpapered in tiny feathers. They were all pointing upward too. Could tell that they weren't the ones who would have to clean it. Most infuriating was working installing a huge balcony on a seafront house. It was a heat wave. We're metal workers, welding, etc. He went out for the day to a regatta and told us we could only drink water from the tap when the lawn sprinklers weren't on. We were less important to him than grass. Story 19. I don't work in rich people's homes, but I remember when I was a kid, we went to a person's house with my dad and there were 3 sneeze consoles hooked up in the living room with like 30 games for each, with many of them being the same games in different stacks, so that the kids didn't have to share their games or consoles. Each TV was a big screen, so like 36 of Sony. To give you an example, and I used Google for this, so I hope it's right, that works out to about 18,000 K in today's money for the TVs, 2,000 in Cine's consoles, and about 12,500 K in games alone. They also all had their own identical dirt bikes, go-karts, and ATVs. They all had their own rooms with big screen TVs, and VCRs with rows of tapes. I remember seeing that they all had the coolest clothing like Ella Gear shoes, starter jackets, Vornay sunglasses, and stuff like that. We had dinner there, and it was steak and veggies, like really nice high-end prepared food. A massive spread that could easily feed 20-plus people for the 8 of us. The whole time, the kids complained about everything, asked mom and dad for money, talked about all these trips they were going on in the summer, on spring break and Christmas vacation to super cool places like Hawaii, Disney World, and Vermont to go skiing. The kids even got money for taxis to take them to the mall. It blew my mind as a kid. I remember telling my dad something like, "I'm so happy we don't live like that. Sure, they have cool things, but they hate each other." Story 20. A $10+ million addition to their house to have a full spa and beauty salon in-house with massage studio, manicure/pedicure station, mud baths, showers, hairstyling, and probably every other little thing you can think of. San Diego has some very rich CEOs. Story 21. I was complaining about having to isolate from my children for a week due to some cancer treatment, mind you. I'm working while having cancer, so obviously, I'm not financially sound. Oh, don't you have a second house you can go to? Ma'am, what? Story 22. My boss inherited a small seaside resort. She lived on site. She never married or had children. What little family she had hated her. She insisted on the restaurant being open on Christmas Thanksgiving, Easter, etc. Usually we served buffet style, but the poor staff busted their butts for days preparing, never getting to enjoy any of it or be with their families. While the buffet was popular, and we had 150 people come through, Boss Lady insisted on reserving a table for herself and a few of her friends smack in the middle of the dining room. Then she would park herself for the most of the day, drink white wine, and make mental notes on how the staff was doing. Her table probably could have been turned over 3 times throughout the day, but it was never about the money. Story 23. She spent all day on the phone trying to scam free stuff out of businesses, flooring for her home, airline tickets. She had legal entities set up for a construction business and a travel agency. The construction business was only used to try to get free samples of materials for her home or to get contractors' prices for products. The travel agency only booked flights for her, her mom, and her son. She didn't have access to actually input tickets without paying, so she'd call random travel agencies after 5 p.m. and claim that her computers were down. Could they please enter the tickets into the database for her? She used whiteout on her mom's prescriptions and added refills and changed the written date so that she didn't have to pay for an appointment. She tried to get me to fax them and call to pay with her credit card, and I refused. She had a flock of peacocks that wandered her property. I had to chase them off the interstate. She had 30 cats, all purebred. She would type up documents on her electronic typewriter and hand them to me to enter them into her computer that had a custom-designed database she managed to get for free out of some poor git who barely knew how to put together an interface. She was bat crap crazy, didn't withhold taxes, and totally ducked my crap up at tax time with the way she reported it. Oh, and I forgot. I was legally served to testify in a deposition in a custody case for her dog with her ex-boyfriend. Story 24. Played a gig at a very wealthy ladies' home as part of a concert series. She requested the band bring some wine for the guests who were attending the show. We find 2-3 nice-ish bottles, which aren't good enough for her when we show up. So one of the band members drives back into town for another wine trip. Meanwhile, in her kitchen is a giant wine rack with 50-plus bottles of perfectly good wine. House is filled with rare, expensive art, sculptures, etc., but we have to go out of our way to spend our own money on alcohol for her guests. Story 25. My mother was a housekeeper for this bachelor. Think of Christian Grey. He had a new girlfriend every month. The room she would stay in would get decorated in any way she liked. She would get a complete wardrobe update with expensive brands. Yes, if she wanted 10 Hermes bags, she got them. Her clothes were donated to me, but reeked of cigarettes. Seriously, these models only ate cigarette smoke. Also, some of these women had dogs, and their dogs would take craps on the bed. These women never cleaned up after themselves. Some of these women also would only wear a pair of underwear once and toss it like a used pad. The bachelor was very kind to his staff, and for the most part, cleaned up after himself. When the latest technology items came, he would buy them and donate his old items. Story 26. I did some electrical work in a mansion for a neat freak widow. Nice lady, but she made me work with my shoes off in the house, which really sucked, climbing the round aluminum steps on my ladder. She followed me around with a broom and dustpan cleaning up after me, despite my work not really generating any mess. She started asking me to dust things up high since I was already in there with the ladder. She also tried making small talk to be friendly, but subjects were things like the recent sale of her beach house and giving up the jet now that her husband was gone. I just couldn't connect on any of it. Also, her garage was finished nicer than my kitchen. Story 27. About 20 years ago, I worked with a picture framer who worked with some clients on Bishop's Row in London. We had access to some of the homes of the wealthiest people in the United Kingdom. Their staff were amazing and treated us so well, and in some cases allowed us to explore and suggest locations for artwork or styles of frames to complement furnishings, etc. One of the clients we worked with sat down with us to discuss one of his other homes that was being built. Ground up, fully custom, exterior. He talked with us about the walls specifically, and that they would have real gemstones, i.e. diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires within them. These were not small walls. Think around 30 feet long and about 12 feet high in places, and the gemstones he showed us pictures of were not exactly small. When we got back to our work van after the discussion, we just looked at each other. Then we were talking about the rest of the house. Did you see the underground pool? Did you see the mega bottle of Chanel in the downstairs bathroom? Which bathroom? There were 7! It just boggled out minds that there was that much wealth in the house. And yet here he was discussing buying a plant of land and building a house and sticking rare gemstones into the walls because duck you money. Story 28. I did a carpet fitting job for church in London. The carpet was bright green imitation plastic grass. It covered every inch of the church's warehouse, 6,000 plus sesquium floor space. The pastor was always in and out, different luxury cars every visit. Every time he saw me, he would bless me by giving me a 50 pounds note. I got at least an extra 100 pounds a day for him, which was great as a teenager. Looking back and thinking about it though, members of his congregation were dirt poor. They would come in to pray on this weird fake grass way before it was close to finished. They would throw money at the pastor's feet as he walked past. He'd ignore it, but there would be a guy picking it up soon after. That was the money ending up in my pocket, which felt very unsettling. Story 29. I had a client that decided their massive house wasn't massive enough, so they bought the house next door, knocked it down, then lived in construction for the next 3 years. They added an underground D parking lot with heated ramps. The plumbing for the irrigation system, pools, etc., looked like a water park mechanical room. The wireless internet setup in the house was meant for a factory-large enterprise. He was a very pragmatic guy, but he needed the best of everything. His kids both had their own dedicated playroom. The son had every gaming system imaginable, all wired and put in a lighted cabinet, with a switching system and a TV on an articulated mount that could come out far enough that you could turn it full 180-degree range so you could sit anywhere and see the screen. The daughter's 11th birthday, he uses connections to hire a Vogue staff photographer to come and do a glam photo shoot with her and her friends. Hell, their house had staff hallways in some spots, so the team of people running the joint could navigate the house and be out of sight. Story 30. I worked on a bank, processing payments for high-income customers, so I didn't see inside the home. But one day I had to send $36,000 for the silk wallpaper for the Santa room in the Castle. Story 31. I worked for rich folks in a one-a-year's club. Aside from all the things they buy and stuff you think would be normal, for me it's the amazing amount of food waste that these people produce. We're talking 3 turkeys were made on Thursday for one of these families. There were only 8 people at the table. So they pick over the 3 turkeys, taking exactly what they want, and 75% of the total amount of turkey in the fridge will be thrown out tomorrow. Take that one example and multiply it across all meals, all food, every day. I will show up after they leave for wherever they are off to next for weeks or months, and there will be a fridge in the garage full of random food, some already bad, some half bad, and 2 fridges inside same stuff. I try to drop off any sealed, fresh food to the local school that my friend works at. The teachers always love it. However, the food, the piles and piles of food is what stands out to me. Story 32. I knew a pa to a billionaire. She said he had his shirts handmade, but he'd only wear them once and then discard them. He'd order a fine wine costing $1,000 with a hotel meal, then only drink a glass or 2 from the bottle. She'd wait until he'd gone back to his room and then finish it herself. He employed someone whose sole job function was to catalog his music collection. They had to manually rip all of his CD collection to lossless audio format and fill out all of the metadata tags themselves. Song title, artist, genre, album, X. Not allowed to automate it or use external data sources, had to be done painstakingly by hand. A single spelling mistake and they'd be fired. Yes, I know it sounds made up. Story 33. Not something out of touch, but still surprising experience, so we'll share here. I am in India and was doing some menial job for a very rich guy, mid-50s. He was super rude and very condescending. Our team used to avoid having to visit this guy's residence, but work is work, so had to. Once on a rainy evening, I had to visit his mansion to see why the internet line was down. I had to climb a wall and check some wire. I got totally drenched and still was not able to find out the fault. I needed some help from the main office, and it was clear that the issue was not going to get resolved that night. I was wondering, what do I tell after I get down from the wall? I get down and come back to the door, and he is waiting impatiently. I tell him that it cannot be resolved now and need time till tomorrow morning. He was surprisingly calm and said, okay, and then asked someone, give me a towel to dry myself, and went inside. Story 34. I know a guy who makes $15 million a year. He's extremely smart about technical and business things, but is also weirdly absent-minded about a lot of practical things. He lives on the ocean and loves inviting friends over to go for e-bike rides along the beach. One day I go over to ride bikes, and it turns out he's left the garage open. Unsurprisingly, sketchy people have stolen all his e-bikes. So he just goes on Amazon and orders 4 more. They are nice e-bikes, like $1,500 each. I talk to his assistant who says, yeah, he forgets to close the garage every 6 weeks like clockwork and everything gets stolen. And it occurs to me that this guy is spending around $50K a year replacing e-bikes, and it really doesn't affect his bottom line at all. I'm sure there are things in this thread far more financially absurd, but it's crazy that it's all because he just constantly forgets to close the garage. Mayo Story 35. I know a billionaire who owns a G5 and 50 jet. Private, personal ownership, not corporate. He has 2 pilots and a flight attendant on payroll who chill in an office all day in case he calls and wants to fly somewhere. He's getting older now, and one thing he did that is so obvious in hindsight, but seemed cool at the time, is send his plane to fetch people for him. Miss your granddaughter? call her and say the plane will be waiting for her in a couple hours. Once he was traveling to Nice from his home city. He was staying at the biggest suite in the St. Regis. It's like $40K a night. I was trying to tally up all the cost of him spending a weekend in New York City. Between the room, jet fuel, airport fees, hotels, overtime pay, and per diems for his flight crew. Must be $200K, $300K, just for a couple nights in New York City. Story 36. I interviewed for a babysitting gig in San Francisco, and an insufferable tech couple had an equally insufferable 8-year-old who had 3 bedrooms to rotate between. He slept Monday, Tuesday in one, Wednesday, Thursday in another, and then his weekend bedroom that had more toys and color and fun things. It was insane. I did not take the gig. Story 37. Not out of touch, but remarkable. I was a cable guy for a few months. Primary job was installing modem and amplifier, along with digital TV. Every now and then, when we had a little extra time, they gave us a pool task. Mostly this was cutting of a customer who didn't pay. I had such a task and it was in a castle. Normally, we could cut up from the street, but in this case, the tap was inside the castle. I thought, no problem. These folks have money, why should I care? They let me in and I explained my task. The owner took me to the basement, showed me the tap, and I disconnected. The owner was friendly throughout. When I left again, the door to the living room was open, and I saw a severe disabled kid at the table. I felt immediately bad. Immediately. Story 38. Twiggy's house in Cottesloe is just a piss take. Buy the 6 or 7 houses between you and the beach and level them, then add them to your property. So that out of touch, billionaire can have a beachfront house. He has a gigantic turntable in his garage because turning your car around is for poor people. The worst part was all the contractors on the job were squeezed so hard on prices, a lot of his build was done at cost, plus a bee's banana. Their exact words were, put your best foot forward with pricing, so we will think of you for future work. What ducking future work? Just another piss-taking billionaire, short-changing all his contractors while constantly asking for free upgrades and additions. Interesting to see who else comments about this entitled, because we were all forced to sign an extensive non-disclosure agreement. Story 39. Picasso's hanging in the wine cellar, elevators in the house, the beverage fridges. Oh God, I love the beverage fridges. Incredible snack drawers. So many photos with presidents and other world leaders. But I also saw a lot of sad things, like the parents who hired a young 20-somethings man to come over and toss a baseball with the sons because the dads simply refused to. The nannies who come and go the minute the kids get too close to them. The mom who had an early C-section as it was better for her Hampton summer schedule. How quiet the house could be, despite being full of children and families. Story 40. A fully stocked restaurant-grade kitchen that had never been used, not just barely used. I mean, the Viking range still had protective plastic on the side. The Sub-Zero fridge contained only bottled water and champagne, and there was literal dust on the marble countertops. The owner seemed proud, saying, "We just eat out or have things catered." They'd spent probably $200K on this kitchen as a status symbol, while their actual daily meals came from staff who prepared food in a separate working kitchen in the service wing that I wasn't supposed to see. The surprising part, when I asked about it, they seemed genuinely confused why anyone would want to cook. The kitchen wasn't for cooking because it was for showing guests during house tours. It was like having a museum exhibit of what kitchens used to be for, rather than a functional room. Story 41. I used to be a builder. We built this massive home, and before the exterior was completed, the homeowner and his family moved in. We were doing work in the courtyard that was shaped like a horseshoe, and the homeowner asked us to never look inside of the home that we were surrounded by 300 degrees. They wanted us to look at our shoes for the 3 months that we were there. Yeah. Duck you. Story 42. I worked for the 1% extremely affluent part of the US and have a ton of stories like this. But the most egregious was showing up to this corporate exec's house. The driveway at this place took 15 minutes of meandering to get to the house itself, and out front were some incredible cars. Mercedes G-Wagon AMG, Ferrari F355 Spider, and it just kept going. As I pulled up, his kids were getting into their new Infiniti QX80, starts at $85K, while complaining about the ghetto car they had to use while their Mercedes were in the shop. 3 of them, 3 SUVs, 3 kids careening. Here I am sitting in a damn Jeep Cherokee, just astounded by their reaction. Story 43. One of my clients bought a 13,000 square feet home for somewhere in the neighborhood of Hill. It's a historical site with old growth floors that have copper inlays throughout. 5 stories, the bottom floor is exclusively ballroom and servants' quarters. When I asked him when he planned on moving in, he said never. He said he's doing a two-year, $1 million renovation and using it for galas and entertaining. When I asked what he does, he said he teaches low-income housing at a university. The second one was 2 houses on the water, next door to each other. They were each 10K plus square feet. owned by the same family. One was for parties, the other was for living. It was so they could throw parties and sneak home before it ended. Story 44. Home health nurse here. I saw a patient who was watching Fox News when I got there. She asked me if I was okay with student debt cancellation. I went on to explain that I was, and that I didn't understand why people receiving PPP loans were able to get their loans waived. She responded that her husband took out a PPP loan. They used it to buy a second home that they were upgrading. She was upset that they couldn't find somebody to rent it for what they were asking. She had zero understanding of her own hypocrisy. Story 45. A good mate of mine said his mother cleaned houses, rich people's houses. One lady's house always had a £1 note left somewhere like a test, to test honesty and quality. If the money wasn't found, then the cleaning hasn't been done to its best. She really got pissed off with having to track down the lady and courteously say, "I found this money in the room." So on her last day of working there, she took the $1 note and left 10 shiny clean 10-pence pieces at common locations for the test. Story 46. IDK about out of touch. But I worked a trade with my dad when I was a teenager. I found truly rich people are far more gracious and able to appreciate when stuff is a big deal, actually, than almost rich people. For an almost rich person, if you broke a 28 window pane, they'd lose their mind and scream at you. For a truly rich person, like a tier level of wealth above almost rich, you could spill on a 3,000 rug, or one time, I chipped a vase. Only God and the owner knows the worth of, and they just shrug and figure out how to fix it. Almost rich people are so worried about the image of richness because they aren't actually the top level. Story 47. I had a friend who lived in a huge chateau. She was actually very down to earth, but one day, whilst I was visiting her, 2 guys were there to install a very expensive antique chandelier. As they raised it up, something went wrong and it came crashing to the floor where it shattered into a million pieces. The installers looked like they wanted to die on the spot. It was worth around $80K, and my friend just looked at me, super blasé, and with a wave of her hand said, "Come on, we had best go shopping for another chandelier." Story 48. I spent a summer in high school working for a landscaper. We did this crazy subdivision that was inside another subdivision. Like, you had to go through a gate with a guard to get into subdivision with like $500,000 homes, and then another guarded gate to get into B with $1,000,000+ home. Rich for the area. There was this doctor who also had several patents. His son drove a race car around for fun, let us in to use the bathroom once, and I saw this huge, like 25-foot-long tapestry hanging on the way, obviously very old and handmade. Story 49. They had a private shopper that would buy their groceries and anything else they needed. The shopper would not find them a bargain. They'd buy extreme quality no matter the cost. I remember one time the shopper got home the same time as the lady of the house, as I was fixing their Wi-Fi. The shopper exclaimed how cheap the bananas were at 25 a kilo. They were around 3 a kilo at regular supermarkets at the time. They looked amazing, and I don't know where she was shopping for them. Oh, and these people easily spent $50K a year on their home automation and its support. More money than sense. Story 50. More like what I heard. I started my business in summer of 2020. Had a client hire me that winter. I was immediately intrigued because I knew based on the address that he had to be fairly wealthy. I met him, and as I'm working, he is following me around making conversation. Naturally, at some point, I asked him what he did for work. His answer? He was unemployed. Because earlier that week, he had sold his company for multiple million. The use of unemployed was a wild choice for being in a position where one never needs to work again. But he's a nice guy. 5 years on, he still hires us for seasonal work. Story 51. I'm a plumber, and I work for a lot of really wealthy people because I can charge more and they won't care. I have a regular customer that I go to twice a year to turn on their pool house water and turn it off and blow it out in the winter. They have a basement inside their basement, and inside the basement, they have a third basement that's a full-size NBA basketball court. This isn't Drake's house. This isn't LeBron James' house. This is some old guy who was a hedge fund manager and can barely walk without his walker anymore. That court is used maybe twice a year by his grandkids. Story 52. I don't work for them, but my in-laws are fairly wealthy. It's from inherited real estate, so they don't have to work, and some of them turned weird. While my Phil is a fairly normal guy, he has one cousin who hates washing the dishes. But instead of hiring someone doing it, he's got huge amounts of boxes in the hallway, full of brand new champagne glasses and plates. So he uses them once and just throw them away afterwards. And he eats the same meal almost every day. King crab cans and drinks only champagne. A very weird guy. Story 53. I work in the film industry. I have a friend who was once the third assistant to a famous movie producer. You've heard of movies he has produced, though you don't know his name. And one of his jobs every morning was to buy bananas. You see, this man's wife wanted to eat one perfectly yellow banana every day for breakfast. No hint of green, no hint of brown. So every day at like 5 a.m., my friend would buy 1 dozen of the most yellow bananas he could find. And then when the wife woke up, the chef would pick the one that was still the most yellow to put on her plate. Story 54. I worked as a sound system designer for a while. I once had to design a full concert system for a guy's helicopter garage so he could hire super famous local acts to play private gigs for his friends. He bought a 120,000-pound system like he was buying a pint of milk. Story 55. I delivered thousands of pounds of lumber alone by hand on a hot day, and the mega-rich corporation legal team lead homeowner gave me a 5-tip as she was telling me how much she was looking forward to her new deck. This was her 4th house, I think. It was worth 8 figures, probably more now, and she was retiring soon. Granted, even after a few years, it was still the only tip I ever got doing that crap-ass job, so I guess it actually was well above average. Story 56. My brother installed kitchens, high-end ones. He has a customer that has an appointment every 5 years for a brand new kitchen concept. He gets the plans, buys the materials, and installs a brand new kitchen. What he does not need to do is actually attach things like gas lines or drains for the dishwasher. It's never going to be used. The first time he asked what to do with the old appliances, they told him that's his problem. So every 5 or 10 years, he now has brand new stoves, dishwasher, microwave, and freezer in his kitchen, all 5 years old, all never been used. Story 57. I used to work at a custom metal company. I spent maybe 3 months working on a project we called the $1 Million Closet. He said he wanted to spend $1 million on it. It was a 2-story master bedroom closet with a balcony and a kitchenette. The wallpaper was made of silk and cost $26,000 roll. And after all that, the thing that bothered me the most about the time I spent there was when a man pulled up in a Mercedes dressed in a suit. He was there to professionally install the child seat in the homeowner's car. Story 58. Perhaps not out of touch, but I worked for a high-end moving company in a large city in Europe, and our crew once moved a very wealthy homeowner out of their childhood home in the very nicest part of town. The first thing I personally packed was an original Picasso. I was shocked that the owner was having us do it and not using some art experts, but we took it off the wall carefully and wrapped it in several layers of bubble wrap, then brown paper, and strapped it up high on the van wall and kept loading. Story 59. I used to do appliances and air conditioning work with my dad in Miami Beach. One time, we got called out to check out a broken ACC system on a 50-foot Viking yacht. My dad, who's an avid fisherman, instantly started talking to the owner about fishing and mentioned that a Viking was his dream boat. The owner just shrugged and said he doesn't fish at all, that he only bought the boat because his neighbor had one. My dad was absolutely stunned. At the time, those things were going for around $1.5 million, and this guy basically bought one just because. Story 60. I don't work for the rich, but was visiting my Bill's relative in Seattle a couple of years ago. He took us all out on Washington on a lake and showed us basically Billionaire Row sitting atop a small cliff. Jeff Bezos' ex-wife lived there. The community had their own police force, and then each house that was on the cliff had their own private tram that took them from their house to the boathouse lying on a lake at the bottom. I had never seen a private tram before. Only ones at national monuments, so it seemed so over the top to me. Story 61. I once worked in a very wealthy family's house, and the most out-of-touch thing I saw was this. They had a guest fridge that was always fully stocked with expensive food and drinks, but nobody was allowed to touch it. Not the guests, not the staff, not even the family, unless it was a special occasion. It was literally a display fridge for vibes. Meanwhile, half the stuff inside expired regularly and got thrown out untouched. They treated groceries the way normal people treat decorative pillows. Story 62. Odd, the top of my head. 20K toilets, 150K chandelier, 10 million vacation home. Maybe used 2 weeks a year. Buys a new car every time they come into town to use their vacation home. 3 assistants that manage everything for them. Dinners only in private rooms at restaurants. Story 63. I put a 16-foot big-ass fan, actual branding, in a townhouse in Vale, Co. for a couple. It barely cleared the walls and caused every window and door on the 4-home unit to flex every time it was turned on or off. Had a guy just down the street from that job call me. I removed a 1-floor elevator on Monday, replaced it on Tuesday to make inspection, removed it again on Wednesday, and then built a wine room where the elevator used to sit in the basement. Story 64. I saw a garage entirely made of marble. The man arrived in front of his car, absolutely incredible by the way, took out covers to put them on the tires, and returned with the car to the marble garage, quietly. The rest of the house was also entirely made of marble. There were magnificent chandeliers everywhere, a gigantic and sublime piano, and of course, the ragdoll lounged on it, like in the movies. Story 65. A politician bought a multi-million-dollar mansion in my city that he does not live in and barely visits, just so he can claim to be a resident of my state to get himself elected. Not surprisingly, he is cheap as hell when it comes to fixing anything, and we were one step away from filing a lien on the property to get paid for the work we performed. I hope the boiler he refuses to replace goes down again, freezes, and destroys the place. Story 66. I moved furniture, often for high net worth people, some extremely wealthy. Most of the extremely wealthy didn't tip at all, not even a snack, but some of the houses and apartments were incredible. Story 67. When I was first house hunting, I was looking more at buying a condo as opposed to a house due to my limited budget at the time as a fast food manager. I was pretty excited to tell anyone about my plans. My rich aunt who married into her fortune just immediately scoffed and told me to buy a house instead. Story 68. Worked for a rich family who had their own airport in their backyard. They would have people over and fly them in or fly to town for groceries. Extreme. Another rich lady I did landscaping for wouldn't pay me on time. So I asked for my pay, and she would get all concerned that if I needed money so bad, she knows this soup kitchen she used to help out at send money donations. Story 69. I once experienced a designer loading in a very, very expensive house. Enormous boxes of books came in all perfectly sized and colored for where they'd be placed. Whole walls of books. Perfectly placed books on every coffee table, end table, nightstand. It was really something else. Story 70. I recently looked at a 2-meter house, 3 to 4x the value of the surrounding homes, that was so poorly designed. They obviously had the money to say X bedrooms, etc., but cheaper out on the architect. Half of the house made no sense, which made it worthless. If you're splashing out on being the best house in the street, hire an architect who knows what they're doing. Don't get a builder to budge something together. Story 71. I have a rich girl coworker. She doesn't realize she has a really good safety net with her family. One day I was talking about the struggle of having to buy 400 tires before paying rent, and she said, "Oh, my dad just buys me the most expensive tires, so I don't have to worry about it." It's not as crazy as some of the comments here, but I am constantly pointing out that we live vastly differently. Story 72. They had converted their attic into a sauna/steam room/European shower. That's what they called it. Basically, whole attic of this 209 meter was a massive bathroom full of granite and marble. The steam room was pretty dope, too. They said they ever used it, and it was all for show. Story 73. I was a cleaning lady for the very wealthy. There was one woman I cleaned for, briefly, who would just take off her panties when she was having her period and just leave them on the floor. Just anywhere in the house she happened to be. She also hired her mom as house manager, and it was part of her job to pick them up and launder them. Story 74. A customer's house I worked at had a beautiful outdoor kitchen with a built-in BBQ next to an infinity pool and Italian-style stone pergola. They also had a second BBQ that was up on a second-story deck. The built-in BBQ costs around $20,000 and even had warming drawers for your towels when you come out of the pool. The homeowner said they haven't used that outdoor kitchen in 5 years, probably. Story 75. Buying their 16-year-old son his own place, complete with assistant. I'm not sure if Jackson Guthrie knows how to wipe his own ass. Story 76. I used to do at work for a family. One day at their main house, doing some work, and the wife was there with a friend and mentioned they were going to do some sightseeing. Silly me assumed they'd drive. Not long after, a helicopter landed on the lawn and they went off for about an hour before being dropped off again. Story 77. I tutored a kid once whose new family home had alongside a pool, tennis court, and a recording studio. A full-size 10-pin bowling lane, complete with each size ball, shoe, and TV with animation. Story 78. My former employer used a 12th century sculpture from a Gothic cathedral as a doorstopper. The apartment was overflowing with art and antiques, and somehow that piece just wound up on the floor. He also had a random decree signed by a Chinese emperor that he auctioned off and used the money to pay his granddaughter's college tuition. Story 79. The almost mile-long driveway was gravel. I thought this was weird because this house was massive, on a hill overlooking a valley. Amazing view. Groundskeeper was a nice guy. We got to chatting and I asked why the driveway wasn't paved, and he said the driveway was only for the help. The owners always arrive by helicopter. Story 80. My grandmother used to clean houses for rich people. They would regularly forget to pay her on time. They weren't trying to stiff her. They always paid eventually. They just didn't realize that people need regular income. The amount of money they paid her was so little to them that it didn't occur to them it was needed in the moment. People who work for the super wealthy, what stuff have you seen? Had a client who purchased a newly built penthouse apartment and wanted a jacuzzi on the balcony. It would have meant a structural column was needed in the middle of the balcony below which the contractor who built the apartment block wouldn't go for, as it would impact selling that apartment. Client buys the apartment below, approves the column, Jacuzzi is installed, then privately sells the apartment below. Voila, problem solved. Story 2. The owner of my company had a customer pay off a giant debt by signing over a yacht to him. When he went to the marina to get the storage info transferred to his name and saw how much it cost to store the yacht there, he bought the marina. Story 3. The CEO of the company I worked for was the founder's son, not an unintelligent guy for the most part. His dad made him start with the most basic jobs in the company and work his way through the different departments. Managerial staff was ordered, upon penalty of termination, not to treat him any differently than a new hire. So when he became CEO, he wasn't a bad guy to with for. Now, this is a company of over 10 lives. One night, I'm working overtime on the late shift and we get this call. Hey, you guys got electrician? The guy is clearly drunk. We have no idea who it is or why he's calling our maintenance engineering group. We ask who he is and he informs us, lightheartedly. He wants someone to take a ride to his house and figure out why the internet isn't working. This is an hour drive away. I volunteer. I was bored off my nut anyway. I get to the house. Entry gate is smashed. Section of the white horse fencing is gone. Jaguar's stuck in the field. Here in the house is dude, completely blasted. He's got a huge cut on his hairline. Are you okay, boss? I'm fine. Why? He asks. Blood literally caked on his face. I accompany him to the bathroom and help him clean himself up, wash off the gash, and put some bandaging on it. Then I corrected the internet. Unplug plug. As I'm walking out, he asked me to do a shot with him. I comment, worried about my job, that it might be a bad idea. He agrees and hands me the bottle. Take it home and do a shot later. Keep it. When I get back to work, I look the stuff up. Never heard of it. It's a 1,500 bottle of scotch. The next day, I'm at work early. About 11 in the morning, he comes walking up. We're not going to be talking about last night. I tell him it's all good. Awesome. A little bit later, I get an envelope. There's a check attached for emergency tech support, $5,000. Story 4. I did a male nanny job for a rich couple who wanted someone to care for their kids. The wife didn't want a female nanny and I was in college, so it helped pay the bills. One day they asked, "Do you want to go to Hawaii?" Turns out the company that the husband was the co of was doing an executive retreat in Hawaii. Instead of finding daycare in Hawaii for their kids, they thought it'd be easier to just pay for me to fly to Hawaii, care for the kids during the day, and then have my evenings or their family time free. So I went to Hawaii on their dime, had my own hotel room, they paid me for my time, and gave me a large stipend for my own food entertainment. I ended up with pretty much every evening off, so I got to spend it. During the day, I brought their kids to the beach, we went hiking, and did some touristy running around. On top of that, they gave me $5K in spending money, in case any of the kids wanted anything. I had to show receipts, but when I tried to turn in the receipts, the wife just said, "Oh, don't worry about it, it's only a couple grand," and never verified how I'd spent some of that money. I couldn't tell if she just trusted me implicitly by that point, or if she truly thought the amount was so small it didn't matter. They were a really nice family, just very well off, which made just spending money on any problems the easiest answer, and I actually got invited to the oldest daughter's high school graduation because she considered me a friend. Story 5. Did appliance repair. One lady had a 10x12 walk-in wine cooler, floor to ceiling stocked with wine in her living room. Another person's house was made of imported stone and had a library the size of 2-car garage. My favorite was an old lady who just had nice stuff. She took care of what she had. Every time I went, she gave me $40 for a nice beer with your lady. I would always refuse, but she insisted and was basically the typical granny everyone would want. Story 6. Worked in recruitment, finding crew for super yachts many years ago. Put forward a candidate for a chief engineer on a very well-known yacht, owned by a very well-known individual. Was the perfect fit of knowledge and experience, and the guy was super friendly and nice as well. They turned him down because he wears glasses and the owner doesn't want anyone with disabilities working on board. Why didn't I tell the candidate so he could sue them? Is that even legal? I had signed various NDAs, so I would have been destroyed. I was told this over the phone, so there was no proof. They have a whole company of lawyers. If the candidate did decide to sue, he would have failed. The yacht industry is small, especially at the top end. It would have been the end of both of our careers. Neither of us would have worked in the industry again. They were registered under a different country's flag, so it would have made it even more difficult. They could have paid for LASIK. This was over a decade ago. Maybe 2. Yes, it was probably still available, but why the hell would they? It was one of the top jobs in the industry at the time, and they could have anyone they wanted. Why waste the money when they can get someone else that has the right knowledge, experience, and fits their requirements? Why don't I name them? Duck, no. Even though it was a very long time ago, and I have nothing to do with the industry anymore, I do not want to duck with these people. Story 7. Not the craziest thing, but wild to me. I was working for a kind of well-off family during a summer. I went inside to get a drink, and the mom was cleaning the kitchen, putting things away and such. She picks up a MacBook and says to me, "Hey, Do you want this? No one uses it. Got a brand new MacBook for college. Story 8. Redid a ladies' shower one time during the middle of a nasty divorce. The shower was 6'10", with the entire ceiling covered in shower heads. Since he was off with half the office, I figured I'd get the other half all in here. Lady was a baller 500 tip for everyone who worked on that bathroom because it was her ex's money. We redid the glass to her shower when I was at a glass shop. How the actual plumbing and stuff worked is beyond me. My job was to bring in giant panes of glass, attach them to the wall floors, waterproof the seals, and dip. With how large her house was, and the other 2 smaller houses that were attached, I'm sure she had enough money to throw at someone to solve those plumbing problems. Story 9. Their kids, all young 20s, never shut the door when using the bathroom. Plenty times while cleaning the house, I'd walk past the bathroom and see one of their daughters on the can. They'd often wave or say hi. Duck and Nodded. Story 10. Never work for millionaires. They're just trying to prove something. Work for billionaires. They know what they want and will just pay what it costs to get it right. A caretaker getting paid 6 American figures for keeping up a multi-million-dollar house that gets used 2 weeks a year. Story 11. I was the project manager for a mansion build for one of the founders of a major health insurance company here in the US. This guy was one of, if not the, best billionaire I've ever worked for. He showed up nearly every day in shorts and flip-flops and would treat all of us like equals. This was around the time that President Obama was about to put out Obamacare. I was in a meeting with the owner and President Obama called him on his cell to discuss the plan. He, the owner, tells us to hold on. The president is calling, to which someone jokingly made a comment about thinking he was joking. The owner asks Obama to say hi to the team, and he did. It was surreal to be at the table with him when the call came through, and an experience I will never forget. He was a founder but sold his shares prior to Obama becoming president and was in retirement working on passion projects, not an active member of the company. I'm not going to disclose his name for NDA purposes. I will say that his story is pretty all-American. Did not come from money, served in Vietnam, and started out as an insurance salesman. Built his own company up from that. Story 12. My brother-in-law builds custom homes in the redneck Riviera belt of Florida. One day, he called me to come over to this 15-mirror beach house he was doing a complete remodel of. He was the original builder. He asked me to bring my truck and trailer. I show up and he walks me through all 4 floors. He then says, the owners have removed all the stuff they want to keep. She has told me to dispose of everything as I see fit. Get what you want. Furniture, appliances, outdoor furniture, rugs, lamps, artwork, you name it. I don't know the value of everything I took home with me that day, but it was the highest end stuff I've ever seen. 4 floors of it. And I only got 1 trailer load because I simply couldn't fit anything else in my house. I likely had over $20K worth of furniture and appliances on that trailer. Story 13. I briefly cleaned houses one summer and these houses were insane. Some had elevators, some had stalls in their master bathroom. One had a literal cave manufactured in the bathroom with shower heads all throughout it. You could walk from one end and come out the other side of the bathroom, split by a massive hot tub. What struck me as odd in almost every house was the sense of disuse. They had grand pianos covered in dust, expensive lamps and throw pillows with the tags still on them, sprawling playrooms with every toy any child could want, totally devoid of playing children. The weirdest house I cleaned, though, wasn't huge and it wasn't gorgeous. It was pretty normal on the outside, but inside, the entire house was filled with piles of clothes everywhere. I pulled aside my fellow cleaner and asked, with all sincerity, how to clean this house. She told me to go around the piles as best you can. They had a mountain of clothes in the living room, like something out of a cartoon. Every couch had stacks of brand new clothes with tags on them. They were the only folded clothes anywhere. In the bedroom, it was the same. Smaller piles in every corner, couldn't fully open or close doors around them. The kids' bathroom didn't even have a shower curtain. Best guess after cleaning that house as best we could is that they don't wash clothes. I think they just buy more and discard the dirty clothes into the piles. I think about that house a lot and wonder if they ever got their crap together. It was like metal bathroom stall cubicles, and the elevators and stalls did not seem related to accessibility. My apologies for any misunderstanding. Story 14. I worked on a billionaire's home installing his custom pool. He ordered a custom iridescent tile. For the whole pool, it cost 440 KUSD for material alone and another 400K to install it. We informed him that it was a special order and couldn't be changed once ordered. He approved. We installed it. Walks out, it looks amazing. All the people working on it thought so. Says he doesn't like it. Tear it out and replace it. All told, he blew like $2.4 million on his pool tile before he got done. Ducker didn't bat an eye. Also worked on a house in that same area that had a 250K fish tank. Can't share pictures of that because it was in someone's house, but still, for scale. The boat in the pictures behind the pool is 90 feet long, story 15. Years ago, I used to work carpentry, mainly doing sunrooms. One of our clients was a brain surgeon who was married to a lawyer, and they subsequently had a massive house on a large property. Their son was also some type of neuroscientist, and with his parents' permission, had yet another massive house built on this same property. Problem is, city ordinances prohibit two separate livable dwellings on the same property. Mind you, these houses were about a quarter mile away from each other. So, to comply with the ordinances, they build a ducking wall between the houses. And this isn't just some dinky picket fence type of wall. It's a massive medieval-style wall that has round towers with merlins and crenelles, a gym midway through, and a massive 750K plus all-glass sunroom, all the while being wide enough to have room for a walking path and a road for golf carts inside the wall. The city ordinance said only one livable dwelling can be on their property, so they just made a massive hallway between their houses. Story 16. Bartending at a fancy party in a very wealthy older couple's house where these people had art on display they had bought from museums. I was working in a room where 3 walls were glass and you could see this beautiful manicured garden with sculptures. When the sun started to set, these big, floppy-eared white bunnies started to appear and frolic around the yard. I asked someone who worked in the house about the rabbits. The rich people bought them as a garden feature. Every once in a while, they had to cull the rabbit population. The rabbits were decoration. This was also the night when I was making an older man a drink, and he decided to ask me, "So, what are the poor people doing tonight?" Story 17. My friend is a mechanic. A wealthy, fat, famous, and all-round unlikable entrepreneur came into his work one day and took a liking to his coworker. He asked my friend's coworker to come and work for him, maintaining his car collection. It was really good pay, and he got to work on some cool cars, so he thought, why not? His days were spent working on old, rare sports cars on his sprawling property. But every now and again, he'd get sent to Europe or the United States to check out cars. Said entrepreneur was interested buying. He'd get sent to auctions all the time and ring up said entrepreneur while it was happening so he could bid on the car on his behalf. Not Jay Leno. If you can figure out the country I'm in, you'll 100% know who it is. Not Clarkson either. Yep, it was Clive. Story 18. I did carpentry for a summer to save up money for school. We would go to huge mansions and amazing houses that needed work done. Usually easy stuff, decorative things, so most times it would be 1-2 days of work. Most times we would work, the family would be home. It's not a problem. Very normal. Once a family had kids and they watched a TikTok video on what poor people eat. And it was about how to cook things like 10-cent ramen and bread with sausages to make hot dogs. They laughed and thought it was fun, so made the food to try in the kitchen. They hated it all. This was the food I grew up eating my whole life. That packet of ramen was the same as the dinner waiting for me at home. Story 19. I've done site work for various CEOs dozens of times over the years, and there's always common threads. It's always been male CEOs, and they genuinely seem relieved to have someone in their house that isn't trying to negotiate or weasel something from them. They'll sit and talk with me, ask my career plans, how I got into the field, that kind of thing. The wives of said CEOs are all eerily similar. Lots of makeup, very strong opinions, very cold, and very standoffish. The garage always has at least one classic car, one sports car, and one car lift. There is always a golf cart on the property. The kids' rooms are always a mess. His teen son had a mattress on the floor with clothes piled up everywhere. I had to hook up some wiring in there and it smelled like his foot was in my face. If there's a dog or cat in the house, it's the most well-groomed animal you've ever seen. They always have a van service to come out once a week or so for grooming. Any mess will be blamed on the cleaning lady. She either hasn't come or missed something, and even though I didn't notice a mess in the first place, they tend to have the best of everything from stores, vendors, you don't normally see. One CEO had a custom German sound system installed in his game room, which featured a bar, a snack bar, theater seating, cafe tables, and 2 fridges. The interface on his entertainment system was also custom-made, and all the TVs in the house used the same interface. I'll always get an invite to go on a boat ride, plane ride, golf trip, whatever they're into. These invites aren't real. I think they do it to remind you they have toys. That's all I can think of for now. It might jog my memory. Story 20. I used to work at a members-only golf/country club. There were members who had been actors, athletes, race car drivers, former CEO of Google, some major money and egos going on. There was one family that had 3 teenage kids, 2 girls and a boy. The mom and the girls were very attractive and knew it. They always looked amazing and had overly entitled attitudes to match. They were fancy. Well, the lady who washed the linens for the county club also did house cleaning for some members. This family was one of them. She said their multi-million-dollar home was a disaster filth zone. They basically did no housework in between having the cleaning lady there. Dishes piled with dried food that smelled, dirty clothes thrown everywhere, Piles of crap all over, sticky floors, dog poop left on the floor. But the nastiest part was the bathrooms. She said they wouldn't empty their bathroom trashes, and the ladies of the house would throw their used tampons on top of overflowing trash. So she had to pick up their used women's products thrown on the floor, not even wrapped in paper. So these fancy Karinis would walk around the club like they were so superior and look down on everyone, then would go home and act like wild apes throwing their trash and period products on the ground. The thought of being so out of touch that you decide it is beneath you to even be sanitary, BC, you can just pay someone to do that for you, is just beyond insanity. Story 21. I am a dentist and used to own a dental office in an extremely wealthy area. I feel like really rich people come in two flavors, very humble and generous, or just 100% a-hole. Most are the a-hole, not much in the middle. True wealthy people care a lot about time, not money. If there was any hiccup in a procedure or something wasn't correct, they would flip out. 99% of the issues they would flip out about, I could fix, but that meant they had to make another dentist appointment, which wasted their time. I hated working on rich people. Best day of my life is when I sold that dental office. Story 22. Had a client come into our 3D printing office. His attention was immediately caught by a large industrial 3D printer in our showroom. Pulled out a credit card and bought a $25K machine on the spot. Best part was when we installed the machine at his facility. First thing he wanted to print was a meter-tall penis. Few weeks after the install, we got a photo of him standing next to the meter penis. Money well spent. Story 23. Worked as one of 4 full-time groundskeepers at a large estate. 46 acres of lawn to mow twice a week. 2 clay tennis courts, 3 pools, 1 for the main house and 1 for each of the 2 guest houses. 100+ acre private lake with boathouse. No clue how big the whole estate was, including the woods. Personal favorite was the 3-mile personal racetrack. But what really blew my mind was that he hosted his niece's wedding one summer, paid $350K to have this massive willow tree trucked in and planted by the lake for wedding photos, only to pay another $50K to have it removed and the landscaping returned to its original state after the wedding because he did not like the look of it. Story 24. I worked at a house in which both father and mother were so busy making money in order to give their children a better quality of life that the eldest son who was at my school joined a gang. That guy didn't lack money, but he lacked empathy, love for other people, respect towards others, control of emotion. Story 25. I'll change a few details to protect the innocent, but I used to give guitar lessons in a very rich area, and the company I worked for had a lot of celebrity and/or just ridiculously rich clients. I saw in-home rivers, elevators, waterfalls, live-in chefs, 40-car garages, fully automated mansions that could change the season indoors. The thing that stood out most to me was the boredom of humanity. Like one guy I became friends with had 17 off-road vehicles, a house bigger than his Lakers star neighbor, and his Chicago Bulls star neighbor for that matter, and traveled to different extreme game competitions every weekend. But when I came over for the lesson, he just wanted to talk about Nirvana, watch TV, learn Pearl Jam bass riffs, and go to shows. The second thing that stood out to me was that the ratio of cool people to screwed up people seemed relatively the same between the super rich and the normies. Like, there was one guy who wanted lessons with his very young son to connect with him, but only lasted 3 minutes every lesson before he had to take an important call or run off to an emergency board meeting. You could see the kid was in a giant playground of a mansion but was just crushed. However, I also gave lessons to a family where the parents were 2 high-powered lawyers, one of whom is now running for Congress. And they were absolutely amazing to those kids. Always attentive, would drop calls from celeb clients to fix a tricycle wheel, would lovingly enforce homework rules. It's great people. That was about the same ratio amongst my middle-class clients and amongst my poor clients. The last thing that stood out as the one really obvious advantage to being rich was the people's physical appearance. By and large, they were almost all very good-looking people at any age, and most without surgery. It's actually kind of incredible what the body can do when you're able not to always feed it healthy foods, live-in chefs, exercise whenever you want in a variety of ways with or without leaving your home. In mansion gyms, indoor-outdoor multi-tiered waterfall pools, week-long skiing trips, personal trainers, etc., and the lack of daily grinding mental stress. I'm not saying they didn't have stress or they didn't work hard, but most did not have that existential stress about what might happen if they got fired because they didn't work the extra Saturday, or the stress of a boss breathing down your neck when you're at a dead-end job just hoping for a living wage. There is something to be said for the mental benefit of hope and joy and inner calm, and unfortunately, money does help with those things. So I did see a large health benefit to people with loads of money also. And lastly, I don't believe any of these people were self-made. This type of wealth is not just working hard and climbing the corporate ladder using nothing but your bootstraps. This type of money is generational wealth with decades-long investment accounts from things set up by ancestors. I'm not saying they haven't worked hard, but turning 100 into 1,000 and turning 100,000 into 110,000 are two very different things, and the latter's inarguably easier from both a percentage and opportunity standpoint. Story 26. I used to clean their super yachts many years ago. They are addicts, so many substances. Back then I was young and happily consumed their leftovers. Story 27. My sister is a butler for a super wealthy family. She told me a couple crazy stories. The family once got this super expensive rare breed cat, and a few months later, the wife tells my sister she can feel the cat isn't quite happy in their house, so she asks her to take their private jet to drop the cat off in their mansion on Lake Como, Italy, so it could spend a holiday in the sun. That same woman would then sometimes berate my sister for buying soap in plastic dispensers instead of just soap bars because it's bad for our planet. They bought this insanely huge, super luxurious cabin in one of the most expensive ski stations in Switzerland. They realized the cabin, more like a mansion really, right next to theirs, was for sale and then bought that one as well, just so they wouldn't have close neighbors. Story 28. I often do work for the wives of wealthy professionals. The thing that has always stood out to me is that if I tell them that something they want isn't doable, they respond with literal confusion. It isn't anger, it's confusion. They are so unaccustomed to not being given exactly what they want that it's as if they don't understand what is happening when they are told they can't have something. Story 29. I did pest control for the CEO of a pretty big candy company. Dude had cases and cases of gummy bears in his basement, like enough to fill a small U-Haul. Story 30. What struck me the most is how extremely picky they are, and how angry they get at anything that isn't exactly how they want it. Because I'm noticing myself drift towards that, even though I'm nowhere near wealthy. It makes me question what I feel entitled to. Everything else I categorize as alien behavior that I could never understand. This is the only one where I see a bit of myself. Story 31. I set up a party for a family out in the Hamptons that bought the house next door just to level it and set up a giant temporary party tent on the plot. Wild crap. Story 32. Worked for the son of the CEO of Rolls-Royce America. He would routinely charge the company when he went to the brothels, and his wife was the company accountant. Story 33. Radiant heated driveways to melt snow. A turntable to rotate their car so they didn't have to back out of their driveway. Lifts in the garage so they can park cars underneath each other. Story 34. Wife is for wealthy and incredibly powerful man. Self-made, humble, uncomfortable in small social gatherings, but a lion in a business setting. Understated houses. What I found most interesting is the guy would think nothing of dropping 5 figures on jewelry or other luxury items. But come the end of the day Friday, that guy's in the kitchen at the office taking home all the leftover bagels from the morning. Story 35. Jeweler here. Some random client quotes client. So I have some gemstones that have just been collecting dust. Pulls out about a dozen amethyst, citrine, smoky quartz, most an inch or more across. What can we do with these? Can you make a crown? No, not a little flimsy fake one, a real one. Me makes a 5 Volby silver and gold crown. New client. You're going to see me a lot. This is going to be my new addiction. Me, okay, I'll bite. What was your last addiction? New client, collecting fully grown trees. I had 45 transported and replanted on my property last year. Client, have you seen my new car? Me, I have not. Client, they only made a few points out the window at a new navy blue Bentley. I didn't like the interior, so I had them replace it all with bright orange leather. They added a plate inside with my name engraved on it. Isn't it cool? 55-year-old client. I want everything pink. Can you tell I'm obsessed with Barbie? Laughs. We're even building a pink house. I want my engagement ring to be all pink. Me. I can make it in rose gold. Client. Great. Do you have any pink diamonds? Me. Not in stock, but I know of a supplier who has one. Client. I'll take it. Me. It's a natural Argyle pink. It would be about $220,000. Client. How soon could you have it ready? Can you add more pink diamonds to the sides? Story 36. 40 gear on sports coaching and travel each for 2 kids. It was a better option than having them get into substances or blow money in other destructive ways. When the oldest kid turned 22, he got mad at his mom and yelled at her. All I know about is, she said, I know. But you don't have an addiction and 3 pregnant escort like your Uncle Mark. Story 37. I did personal shopping for a pop star for about 7 months before they moved out of my area. The main thing I witnessed was inconsistency. Day 1, go find me this exact rug and find some picture frames that would complement this room. Great. I put in a little extra footwork and found that rug discounted. Well, they didn't want it discounted when they can afford full price. Day 2, while they were out the other day, they saw this fantastic sculpture at a home goods store. Can I find it? Hey, turns out I can. No problem. Wait, But if I found that rug from yesterday, discounted, why couldn't I put in the time find this discounted? NDA runs out in 2030, but otherwise I have nothing but praise. They were a joy to work with. It was just very much never knowing what would strike their fancy and when, then not knowing if I should go the extra mile to save money or find a newer model, or just get paid for a full day's work for walking about a mile to bed, bath, and beyond. Story 38. I do high-end florals in very rich area. See tons of obscene shows of wealth all the time. The amount of money some of these people spend of flowers alone is unfathomable. The one that I always come back to is a client who we were decorating their house for Christmas, and as I was hanging garland around their 6-car garage, a separate garage than the one connected to the house, I look in to see each of the 6 spots has a car elevator and is 3 cars deep. So there were 18 of the same exact 350K plus car. Why would anyone need 18 of the same exact car, let alone one that expensive? Story 39. I work as a maid. Not the most ideal job, but it pays well. Children are usually neglected because money can't replace a parent that loves you. Their kids are usually pretty spoiled too. Most kids have the whole Apple ecosystem. Also, what is it with rich children wanting to be from the hood? Story 40. I did a catering job years ago for John Paul DeJoria, Patron Tequila, and Paul Mitchell, and his house was awesome. Riverside, Texas, Hill Country. Beautiful place. We were packing up at the end of the night, and the security guard came by and said, "Stay away from the windows. We are locking up." We said okay, and about 5 minutes later, these metal drop-down armor plates came out of the roof, it seemed, and covered each window and door. Thick metal plating armor. Story 41. Bodyguarded someone filthy rich with next to no class whatsoever. He bought a very sought-after, rare classic car from a renowned Italian car maker, had the roof taken off, painted it a ridiculous pink sparkle color, and put it on the roof of one of his most central buildings in the middle of a large European city. The Italian car maker offered to buy the car, presumably because they were absolutely disgusted with what he'd done to the car and didn't want the abomination to get further exposure as they felt it damaged their brand tremendously. He sold it to them, was then banned from ever purchasing factory new models from that brand ever again globally. Story 42. Used to work for a real estate development company. The boss was the richest guy in town. The second biggest office was given to his wife, who did nothing. Her office was entirely bright pink. They put in a private bathroom just for her. Her parking space was double wide because she couldn't park straight, and she used employees to run all her personal errands. It was very annoying, but we were told we had to do everything she said. I remember she once asked me to print out a website for her. Story 43. Not me. A friend. Old rich guy has no kids, so he's like a son to him. Mansion, boats, all given. When the old man kicks the bucket soon, millions inherited. Duck. Story 44. If most didn't have people clean for them, they'd be lost. Don't go to a rich relative or friend's house and feel like crap. They ain't cleaning that Karen themselves. Story 45. I work with some very wealthy people. I work in nonprofit. Wealthy people who claim to donate hundreds of thousands of dollars a year or even millions of dollars a year do so in deceptive ways. For example, this very rich person in a large city in the USA has a big yacht. He decides that if he would rent his yacht to someone, he would charge $5,000 an hour. No sane person would ever actually pay him $5,000 an hour for his stupid yacht. So he will rent his yacht to a nonprofit organization for 5 hours at a total of $20,000 so that they can host an event on his yacht. He will then write up an invoice and gift that 5 hours, $25,000 to that nonprofit organization. He can then take that $25,000 and get a write-off on his taxes. This same guy will hang out at the nonprofit organization's party and drink their wine, eat their catered food, and he will get someone to captain the ship for free by telling the guy, "Hey, it's for a nonprofit. Don't you want to help them?" $20,000, free dinner, free booze, and a big round of applause for his generosity. Best, he can also avoid an annual tax fee from that city by donating boat time to politicians of that city. Want to host your city worker party on my boat? No problem. Write me a law that says the annual boat docking tax for my huge yacht is waived if I donate X hours a year of yacht time to your city workers or nonprofit organization. These laws are slipped into omnibus packages, and they even look good at first glance. The politician can say, "See, we make the rich pay their fair share in our city," while the yacht owner is taking that check right to the bank. They do this for yachts, property, jets, then they can go around saying they donate so much money to all these nonprofits. They can charge rates nobody in their right mind would ever pay because the IRS will pay them on tax credits. And none of this is illegal. Story 46. I worked for an owner of a large construction company. Back when we had the recession in around 2008, I saw him lay off workers and stop pay rises at the same time of ordering in a brand new Rolls Royce for himself. His money, but didn't sit right with me. Story 47. I work as a private chef in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. for mostly high net worth families, CEOs, owners of sports teams, crap like that. Here's what I've seen. They don't raise their kids. Every single family has house staff, sometimes one for each child. They're not well adjusted, all attend private school, have drivers, and don't understand how anything works. I had to explain what public school is to a kid once. They shop differently than we do. When we go to the store, we buy what we need, a 12-pack of seltzer, only the paper towels or snacks we need. These families order everything and in bulk. It's not one 12-pack of Spindrift, it's whole cases, and everything is ordered and delivered. I've been to homes with floor-to-ceiling cabinets of just beverages. They do not take the subway or public transportation, ever. A room dedicated only to silverware, and another just for servings platters. The amount of money spent weekly on fresh flowers is obscene. They are beautiful, but damn. A dining room table that cost $250K. Elon Musk, not by choice, he just happened to be at a dinner I was working. They spend more money on kitchens they'll never use that most people will ever spend on a vehicle. I've worked on 20K plus ranges in private homes. You can find a picture of one in my post history, the home. I worked for a family during the summer of last year that has at least 75 mil across 3 properties alone. It's absolutely wild. They will often try to undercut you. Only a few times have I had a billionaire look at my rate and not try to get me to take less. I've been standing in a 40 mil Hamptons home listening to a woman try to negotiate me down. They eat way simpler than you could imagine. I've written extensive fine dining menus for private dinners, only to be asked for something as simple as steak, smashed potatoes, and broccoli rabe. No crap. This is a standing dish for a client of mine, so ducking simple. They will give you all expenses paid trips just so they don't have to worry about cooking their own meals. Aspen, Cabo, Hamptons, Jackson Hole, doesn't matter. They don't want to cook. I might be missing a few things, but this is just off the top of my head. Story 48. I was a trainee sailing on a container ship going from Dubai to Tokyo and back, via all the big ports. One day the route was changed, and now we would go from Singapore to LA. Because this change wasn't planned, we, the 2 trainees, didn't have visas for the US, meaning we couldn't leave the boat once we docked. For us, it was not a problem. We'd only be there for 2/3 days at most. The company decided we should get the visas. They flew us from Hong Kong to our home countries, got us a 10-year work permit for the US in a matter of days, and then flew us back to Dubai to join the ship. I've never seen money thrown around like that for little to no reason. It was crazy. Story 49. An old boss did extremely well and sold off the lion's share of his ownership, but wanted to stay involved in the company anyway. So he'd drive his absurd supercar to the office and just hang out. One day he came into the office, and it was set up in such a way that the executive offices were in a little 2x2 office glass pod in the middle, with curtains for privacy if needed, and our rows were arrayed around them. He sat in his little glass office all day and cleaned his handgun. I'll say this though, he wasn't a bad dude. We may not have seen eye to eye on politics, but if you worked for the company, he knew your name and would hang around and chat. Super generous around the holidays with time off and the big holiday party, door, prizes, stuff of that nature. The company went way downhill when he finally let go of the reins completely. Story 50. I interned a long time ago where we had to clear every single check or credit card charge with a guy's parent because he got conned into joining a cult, and the leader kept getting him to piss away his trust fund. Once there were enough checks and balances in place, he got kicked out of the cult for not paying up anymore. I felt bad for the guy. He was actually pretty nice, but his parents just pawned him off on the help while they traveled, and he was an easy mark because the cult made him feel loved. Story 51. You weren't allowed to hand him or his family things that have already been opened or used. That bottle of sunscreen that was only used once. Don't even think about it. Everything has to be new. There was a desk that had bottles and bottles of just sunscreen that they only used once and never again. The interesting thing was this guy owned an eco-resort. Story 52. I coached sailing to the child of a CEO from one of the biggest US service industry conglomerates. When his child did well, he would take me out to dinner sometimes with his buddies. The many stories they each told of cheating on their wives, substances taking, tax evasion, and general scumbagger genuinely shocked me, especially when I had a close relationship with some of his children. Story 53. Have a buddy that owns a window cleaning business. Came out to an estate to bid on the job, inside and out for the entire property. Owner decided to just do half, and it was over $13K in 2 days for a large crew to complete. When my friend cashed the check, he noticed the memo. Windows, house number 5. Story 54. I babysat for an old money family as a teenager. Massive house that had passageways and walls that the kids would use to play hide and seek. Basement had a passageway to a weird underground cave or cellar that had been bricked off for decades. One day the dad, who was the coolest dude I've ever met, asked if I wanted to earn an extra $200. I sat sure, and he wants me to help him knock down this brick wall because after 40 years, he can't stand it and has to know what's behind it. We go down and knock this wall out, only to find that in the late 1800s, his family had slaves, and instead of setting them free when slavery was abolished, they put these four poor women in a good cellar and walled them in. The smell when that wall CSM'd down was awful, and even 20 years later, we have no idea what their names were, or anything other than they were women. They buried them in the old family cemetery at the back of the property, right next to the relatives that walled them in to die. I still visit the family, as I'm great friends with the older kids, and always go back and out flowers on those women's graves. They have headstones that simply say in memoriam since we don't actually know their names. Story 55. Worked for a 3-person dog-walking doggy daycare company. Ended up getting some very wealthy clients. They traveled for fun so often my boss and I had their dog for more days out of the year than they did. It was to the point that people at my favorite dog park thought he was my dog. As you can imagine, the dog misbehaved a fair amount, but he was also sweet. The same couple also employed a pool guy. I helped him out one day when their pool cover got stuck, and he offered to pay me cash next time he came by. He asked where he could leave an envelope, and I told him just to leave it on the counter inside. He looked at me incredulously and said, "Do you really think they let me in their house?" I never knew what to think of that. He seemed like a professional guy and had started working for them just a few months after me. Story 56. I have a friend who owns his own business. He was in this house one time doing some work, and as he passed a room, he saw a Gibson Les Paul leaned up in the corner. He mentioned it to the owner of the home, just making a statement. "Hey, I saw that Les Paul up there. Do you play?" The owner basically said that they had purchased the guitar for their son when he was in high school, but he had since gone off to college and the guitar probably hadn't been touched by anyone except their maid. And over 5 years, my buddy was like, "Cool, well, that's a pretty nice guitar. It's a shame it doesn't get played more often." And then went back to working. That was it. No more conversation as he was walking out after finishing the job. The owner came down with the guitar in his hand and asked my buddy if he wanted it. He tried to say no, but the person wouldn't take no for an answer. And that is how my buddy got a $10,000 Gibson Les Paul for free. Story 57. It's crazy how many try to get out of paying for things. Makes you wonder if that's how they got wealthy in the first place. But as for material things I've seen, I worked on a house that had a huge swimming pool with a 1/3 mile long lazy river. He also had a movie theater that sat about 20 in a 60,000 aquarium in his basement private bar. Story 58. I worked on a school project with a girl whose family net worth is more than $9 billion. They have a consumer products company that is a household name everyone would recognize, and it is family run. 2 stories. First, at dinner one night, she made an offhand comment. "Growing up, my parents would tell me to eat all the food on my plate," and I thought, yeah, me too. Until she continued, "Because when I'm running the family business, it will offend our overseas suppliers if we don't eat all the food they serve." Second, I was writing a fluff article for the school newspaper about an event. It was fun. Many people, including John Park, Jose Gonzalez, and Mary Jones, all attended. I gave them each an FYI before submitting. She replied immediately, very agitated, and said I couldn't include her. I thought she misunderstood and said it would only show up buried at the back. She replied, "You don't understand. If my name shows up in the paper at all, I will get angry calls from my whole family, parents, aunts, uncles, everyone." Story 59. I don't know why I love this story, but I always bring it up to show how the real wealthy treat money. My father was the private chef for a billionaire. He's famous-ish and would travel with him on his private jet, make him anything he wanted, etc. He was a very, very genuine man, the billionaire, and was very good to my father and us as his family. That being said, one story always stood out. He wanted a smoothie. They had just arrived at his House X in beautiful Location Way, and my dad hadn't been in that kitchen in quite a while. He couldn't find the blender and was told to go out and buy one, high-end of course, and make a smoothie. He does this, makes smoothie, boss is happy, and while cleaning found 10 blenders in obscure spots, likely done by the cleaning crew. It just to me puts things in perspective at a real level. This man had thousands of dollars worth of pristine, high-end blenders. I probably wouldn't even entertain buying because it'd be too much for me to justify for a blender and could care less. I don't know, but to me it was a very real example of wealth at a human level, if that makes sense. Story 60. I worked retail, J. Crew, on the main street in a super rich town. One woman took off her diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe and somehow forgot it in the dressing room. I found it, and manager has no idea what to do with it. We had a lost and found drawer, but it was full of sunglasses and random crap, not really safe for a $500K watch, and decides to keep it in the store's safe, usually used only for cash. When nobody came by the next day to claim it, I called the company, which took forever, gave them the serial number, and they called the owner to tell them where to pick it up. They give me the owner's name to verify it's her when she comes in. The next day, a woman comes in and asks for the watch. I ask for ID to verify. She gives it. And lo and behold, she's not the owner, but she explains she's the owner's housekeeper and was sent to pick it up. My manager says I can't give the watch to her and insists I get the owner with their ID to pick it up. I tell the housekeeper, and she's annoyed because she has a lot of errands to do and doesn't want to call her boss. Eventually, she does call and tells the owner she has to come herself with the ID. But first, the owner tried to claim I'm the owner over the phone and didn't understand why that wasn't enough proof. Housekeeper leaves to run other errands, and about 2 hours later, the owner comes in and proceeds to have a hissy fit asking why we had to bother her when it's clearly her watch. How TF we were supposed to know that is beyond me, and scolds me for wasting her time when I say I have to go get it from the safe. When I get back, I put on my customer service smile and tell her I'm sorry that recovering her $500K watch was so hard for her. But a lot of other people have tried to claim the watch was theirs, so we were just being careful. In reality, there was only one shopper who overheard us talking about the watch and jokingly said they would take it har har har. But she didn't seem to care and humphed her way out. The same housekeeper comes in the next day and returns 7 cashmere sweaters the lady bought all crumpled in a ball. Apparently, the owner got too exasperated in our fitting rooms and decided to buy the rest of the clothes without trying them on, and then forgot her watch. Buying a crap ton of clothing without trying was common for rich people, but they usually forgot or didn't care enough to make return. Strangely enough, it was not the weirdest dressing room incident in my time there. Story 61. I knew a DJ working for the super wealthy, not a famous DJ, however the guy was good and low-key. The one thing that always stood out for me were the group sex he played for. He always told me after dark, you would not believe the people ducking and swapping wives. And substances, so many. Story 62. Not me, but my cousin teaches English to foreign students in London. Sometimes they're kids. She was once asked to go to a wealthy Arab's home to help their kids learn English. The house was stunning, the usual opulence, but the liquid hand soap was watered down. Despite being incredibly rich, they skimped on basic items like soap, loo roll, etc. It was all cheap brands, or as I said, watered down. Story 63. My sister worked on a private yacht of one of the old money US families. She said the parents all seemed okay. The kids, though, were ducked up, crapping the bed every night. Substances constantly, poor social skills. Story 64. I did a clerical job for a very rich man and mostly worked at his office. But once I was at his home for some business reason and heard him in the background telling family members to get fake passports and cash together and get ready to flee the country. Apparently, he had been engaged in some sort of illegal business activity. The next day, I went to work. The office was closed and padlocked. I never did find out if he outran the law or not. Story 65. Pumped a bunch of money into the Malibu City Council in order to change a few seats. This would allow him to have the local ordinance changed so his front doors could be taller than 20 feet. Story 66. My friend is an aeronautical engineer, worked for some Saudi family's airport in the US. Got sent all over the world to work on and retrieve private jets. Insane. He quit to be closer to his wife and newborn kid. Story 67. I dated the heir of a family worth billions. He had a black Amex that was paid off every month. He never knew who paid it or anything like that. He regularly planned vacations that cost 50 to 100K, usually to super remote areas. Waking up every day with nobody expecting anything of you makes a person weird. He was a very kind person, but just out of touch. To people who have also worked with multimillionaires or billionaires, what is something different they do from ordinary people? Story 1. One old money rich person treated me to a fancy meal and she was super polite and nice and tipped well. What struck me was the decisiveness and confidence that everyone there would cater to her. And they did. She wanted X dish that they didn't make that day, and they made it. The one that sticks with me was at the end she said, I want a cappuccino with something. I want them to put a design on it. Like I've gotten cute cappuccinos in my life. It doesn't even cost extra. It never occurred to me to just ask for everything I want all the time. This was the same person that on a business trip hugged me after the flight. I did it, woman thorned me. Oh, is this your first time in economy? And she goes, no, flying commercial, just so we all understand how rich. Story 2. Years ago, a friend of mine's dad was trying to sell his startup company and picked up an investor at the airport. He was proud of his classic Rolls Royce and noticed the investor looking around, playing with the air vents. So he said, is this your first time in a Rolls Royce? The guy said no, but it was his first time in the front seat. Story 3. He managed time very differently than anyone I was used to. E.g., our meeting with him began precisely on schedule, lasted 30 minutes, and there was no chit-chat. Before this meeting, we had a pre-meeting with his admin to discuss expectations. The admin explained that we had to be on time. No introductions/titles, just name, no small talk, no marketing. Be prepared to answer technical and financial questions quickly and succinctly. For this latter, if there were numbers, we had to know precisely which page of the material had the information. When the meeting took place, we were brought in exactly to the second. at the start time. Sat down, and within 30 seconds, he was asking us all manner of questions. I had to field technical questions that appear to be asked not so much for whether my answer was right, but that I didn't hesitate. I also gained a healthy respect for my manager as he was sharp and answered quickly and accurately. Story 4. My son's friend when in elementary school. Dad was one of the 2 founders of Capital One. Mom had a secretary for playdates. Dad would fly to London to watch Tottenham, had a permanent seat. Their London house was next to J.K. Rowling. You couldn't tell by the way they dressed or their cars, but their vacations were the big difference. The strange thing is that their son loved a mango juice, sold maybe 10-15 miles in from their house. I always made sure we had some for mine. I send it to him via Amazon occasionally. Story 5. I work with lots of millionaires and a few billionaires. Most work non-stop. There's no boundary between workday, holiday, weekend, etc. But there is also no boundary between friend, family, coworker, lots of time. It is easy to forget the cost of things when money is meaningless. When a $500K Ferrari is the financial equivalent to a gallon of milk for most families, then spending $20K on a party that includes private chefs, a bar staff, etc. is nothing. What happened recently was that someone mentioned there were a bunch of kids and misses who were getting trained at trade schools for jobs. But the certification exam was $350, so only 2 kids out of the 35 in our pilot program got certified. It was hard for anyone in that room to understand how these families couldn't come up with $350, having a whole year to prepare. Most people in that room bill at the $250, $500 shar, if they work at all. 2 days ago, someone took me out to lunch and the bill was $250. But since it's Christmas season and the waitress was really great, he tipped $2. A different time, we went out for drinks at the bartender was one of those, tell me what you like and I'll make you something. The lady goes to pay and just writes math in the tip line and put $500 on the total for what was less than 3 drinks a person for 4 of us. On the other hand, there are lots of times when someone says something completely off-the-wall elitist. I grew up incredibly poor, and some of these people are 5th and 10th generation wealth. They grew up with maids and butlers and private planes, and their great-grandparents have buildings all over the US named after them. One time, one of them was talking about how she went to Walmart to people watch and never felt unsafe, even though it was the black part of town. It was such a condescending and racist approach, we had to counsel her to never do that again. Another guy says things like, the blacks will hang, and he thinks he's very woke. Aside from all that, there is a general loss of touch with what everyday people face. Story 6. My aunt and uncle are self-made multimillionaires. If you met them, you'd think they were well off, but nothing spectacular. In general, they're both very frugal. However, the 2 areas where they completely detach from ordinary life are 1. Vet bills for their animals. The example that most stands out in my mind is their last dog. He needed dialysis and no vet where we live could provide it. So they did their research and discovered that the best treatment in the country was available in London. A flat in Kew, I think somewhere fairly central anyway, was rented for the 6 months the dog would need treatment for, and my uncle would stay in it for 1 week a month while the dog had his treatment, then travel back home for the other 3 weeks. 2. Legal help. Neighbors being pains in the backside? Send in the solicitor. Trying to organize a purchase or sale and it's taking too long? Pay the solicitor to fast track. Local council leaving traffic lights up for over a week after work has been completed? Cry havoc and let slip the solicitors of war. Story 7. I do consulting for public companies and work directly with CEOs and board members. So they're all multimillionaires, but only a couple in the 3 Comma Club. There's no demarcation between personal and professional time. We should set up a call, meaning vaguely next week, and they will respond with, I am free at 10 a.m. on Sunday while I'm at my kid's ski lesson. 2. They ask a million questions about every detail. This is the #1 personality trait I've noticed. The critical thinking is to the point where if you misspeak one word that is easily well understood, they will question you to be certain. I do think this is one of many factors that has made them successful. Story 8. I was born to working-class parents who made it to the upper middle class and put me in old New England prep schools. So I grew up around a lot of super rich people despite not being one myself. There were exceptions, but generally the old money families were pretty humble and unassuming. One of my closest friends, for example, grew up in a legit mansion, 15K square feet in the primary residence, had several other houses in various states, countries, a yacht, just endless money, and yet he still grew up wearing hand-me-downs from his older brothers and family friends. These families had the mindset that we have endless pits of money, so we'll buy whatever we want. Alongside, it's silly to spend money for the sake of spending money because we don't need to prove ourselves to anyone. As a result, you'd end up with these weird inconsistencies, like, This kid is at my house talking about how his mom just bought a second set of horse stables so she has a place for her horses at their favorite vacation house. While my mom, who grew up in the projects, is wondering why his jacket has a tear with duct tape covering it. They spent money for pleasure, utility, and convenience, not for status or superficial reason. In comparison, the first or second generation money families tended to be concerned with keeping up appearances and buying fashionable things. Again, there were exceptions, but this was definitely the trend. If anyone's interested, I did pretty well for myself, but made the decision to buy a home in a town with top-level public schools rather than sending my kids to private school. My property tax is wicked high, but it's less than half of what tuition for one kid currently is at the schools I went to, $60K plus for high school. Story 9. One of my friends is going to be a billionaire soon. His father is dying, and he's the sole heir to the family fortune. He already had access to it, but he chooses to live a middle-class life instead. It's important to him to teach his kids the value of hard work. So he's basically the exception. Story 10. My experiences. 1. CCO of large company. Didn't come from huge wealth, so fairly self-made. As others said, a literal workaholic. 24/7, 365 days a year. Zero boundaries between work and personal, and expected the same of his direct reports, unfortunately. Endless energy. Perfectionist. His wife was a beachy, and his adult kids hated him. 2. Billionaire who inherited wealth. Was on his ranch in the West. And this cowpoke guy went with us on a horseback ride. He also cooked breakfast. I literally thought he was a hired hand. Ends up, he was the owner of the ranch. Was kind, friendly, could rope a steer like the true hired hands and make some mean breakfast tacos. Of course, he flew to the ranch on his PJ. While we got there, dragging ass in economy class with 12 hours of delays. Story 11. I worked for a billionaire for a year. At first, it was great, because he made us feel he was in the trenches with us. I came to find out that he made fun of us. There was only 8 employees. For the salary he was paying us, and tended to throw people under the bus. It was one of the very few jobs that I gave less than 2 weeks' notice and never looked back. I am so glad to be out of there. Story 12. I've worked in 2 companies that went from nothing to 2B sales in 20 years. The founders were all engineers and still worked alongside us. My favorite one used to ask permission to sit at my lunch table. He's easily the greatest human being I've ever known. You'd never know the kind of money he had if you saw him. He still drove the car. He restored himself in college. He'd drive across town to save 0.05 gallon on gas. Just from his public stock trades, we knew he had hundreds of millions, though. This was in the 90s. I still talk to him. I emailed him last week. Honestly, all of the founders have been something like him, although he was the greatest one. The others did spend their money, though, sometimes extravagantly. One, for example, had married a history major and had the hobby of relocating historic buildings to his property. His house had museum-quality antiques, such as George Washington's dinner table, and he actually used them. I guess by the strictest definition, I'm a multimillionaire, as the first digit of my Fidelity account does go to 2 sometimes. As a nearly 50 IO engineer, that's not that unusual, though. Millionaires aren't what they used to be. Story 13. I nannied for millionaires. It was new money, and they had both grown up fairly blue-collar. They were very down-to-earth, giving, and kind. Their children, however, had no rules, structure, or expectations inside of the house. Their previous nanny gave them whatever they wanted. That changed when I stepped in. I firmly believe kids need to know how to clean a bathroom, wash dishes, sweep a floor, and clean their rooms. Took about a year to get to that point, but I can rest easy knowing they're both currently in college and know how to clean the toilet. Story 10. I was installing a floor in this Texas castle, and there was this guy who kept coming over to check out my work. I thought he was the laborer of some other trade, but he was friendly, so we just kind of started talking about life and crap. I got to a point where I needed a hand to finish the install, and when the guy got there to help, the same guy came around checking out our finishes, and the guy helping me snapped up and started getting really attentive. When the guy walked away, I asked him why he was tripping out, and he told me that was the client. He was a billionaire and owned all the property that your eyes could see. So one thing they do is go about their lives like a normal person. Story 15. Take the risks. Worked with many millionaires in my time in security, and what surprised me is how not smart they are. Most of them are just people who took a risk by starting a business or making the right investment, and it paid off. Story 16. I work with one, the owner of the social enterprise that employs me. Very driven, scrupulously fair, left-leaning, works about 12 to 14 hours a day, plus another half day in dribs and drabs over the weekend, but doesn't expect staff to do the same. Story 17. I directly worked for 3 before. They were always busy. They value time a lot. One of them is a celebrity. The other 2, who were former Wall Street bankers, were doing business trips from one country to another so frequently as if they were just traveling from one local city to another. This was pre-pandemic. Story 18. My friend was a pilot for a very large aluminum business. Think aluminum foil. The brothers would fly for business meetings, and my friend would make all the arrangements, including car rentals. These guys would drive off and go to meetings, dinner, etc. Sometimes they would just leave the rental car behind and ride with others to change venues or whatever. He tried to tell them the rental doesn't stop unless the car gets returned. They didn't really care. If it was any level of inconvenience, they just moved on. It was more than once he had to go back and find a car based on their recollection and get it returned.